Welcome to the Archie K Davis Center. This is the home of the Moravian Music Foundation. Well, one of our homes. We're here in Winston-Salem and in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. If I've not had the pleasure of meeting you, my name is Chris Ogburn. I'm the director of the Moravian Music Foundation here, and I'm very excited about this afternoon's program. I'm going to turn the floor over in just a second, but before I do, I will draw your attention over here to the display. So once the talk is over, you will be free to come up and get a closer look at some of the items that I've put out on display for y'all today. We are in great company today. I'm very excited to welcome Gary Wedow with us today. But he's been all over the United States, and we're very lucky to have him here in Winston-Salem this week to conduct the 90th anniversary performance of Handel's Messiah by the Mozart Club, which will be this Sunday at 3 o'clock. So hopefully, many of you, I'm sure, are singing in it, but those of you who are not, hopefully be able to go and hear that wonderful performance. I maintain there's very few works of art that achieve the majesty of the Messiah. It really is one of the greatest works, I think, ever composed. So with that, I will turn it over now, and we're in for a treat. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here at the Moravian Archives. And what an honor and pleasure to be back with the Mozart Club, the Winston-Salem Mozart Club, which is such a terrific tradition and such a terrific event, community that comes together to put on this wonderful, I hope, performance of their annual Messiah, now their 90th year. I have a disclaimer. Nancy Ann Harris Greenfield used to introduce me as a Handel scholar. I am not a scholar or a musicologist like Chris is. I'm a conductor who I hope is a scholarly conductor. This has nothing to do with my speech today, but there are three different kinds of conductors. There's the tyrant, there's the scholar, and there's the father. And every conductor has to be a little bit of all three of those at different times of their career. So sometimes in the same rehearsal. But I drift to the scholarly father side. I love scholarship, but I depend on people like Chris to steer me in the right direction. Now, the title of our conversation, and I would love it to be a conversation. So if you have questions or if you have challenges, if you disagree with me, I'm glad that you speak up as we go along. In fact, I mean the title of my little speech, talk, Messiah as Opera, I mean it to be a little argumentative, because is Messiah an oratorio, which is what Handel called it, or is oratorio opera? I don't know. Maybe we'll answer it today. How can you, I say it's an opera, but how can you have an opera without identifiable characters? There's no characters in Messiah, are there? Soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And there's really no plot, you know, like in Romeo and Juliet. There is a theme, but no actual plot. So, what is an oratorio? Oratorio actually means a hall for prayer. And the Latin verb orare means to orate, to speak, or to pray. And I did it. Fabulous. Thank you. This is the church in Rome, Santa Maria in Vallicella. Santa Maria in the Little Valley. And it's the home of the Oratorians, founded by Philip Neri as a religious order in 1556. And it's the first place where an oratorio was performed. Now, Philip Neri believed in his religious services to put in elements of music and drama, like the medieval mystery plays. So during his sermons, he would have dialogues very much like the medieval mystery plays. And in 1600, a composer, Emilio Cavalieri, presented an oratorio, a rappresentazione di anima e di corpo, a presentation, a struggle between the soul and the body. It was a secular oratorio, a dialogue between the disciplined life of a pure soul, the anima, and the pleasures of the body. So there were two characters. There was the soul and the body. And the body had a bunch of bad companions. And the soul had angels saying, "Come this way." And the body had companions saying, "No, come with me." Now, Cavalieri was an actor, a singer, a composer, and a choreographer. And in the score, I've done this piece twice, and I just saw it last year. There are stage directions, and he had choreography. So does that make it an opera or an oratorio? He was very upset because when other composers started saying, "I wrote the first opera," he said, "No, wait a minute. I wrote the first opera, 1600, because rappresentazione is an opera." Now, we're going to talk about Handel today, right? Handel, this is a picture of Handel by Jakob Christoph Platzer. And as you probably all know, Handel was born in 1685, the same year as Bach, in Halle, Germany. And in 1703, he went to Hamburg to play in the opera. And he composed an opera while he was there, Almira, in 1705. And he composed three others that are unfortunately lost. In 1706, he moved to Italy. He was 21 years old. Imagine his bravery. And he was I said this the other night in the rehearsal, we think of Baroque people as being very affected and wearing lots of frills and wigs and everything. Well, when he was in Hamburg, he got into an argument with his colleague, Johannes Mattheson, over who should play the harpsichord in a performance. And they got into a sword fight, and Mattheson said he could have killed Handel, except his sword hit a button on Handel's vest, and that ended the fight. So Handel was no shrinking violet. In fact, he was very tall, he was very strong, and the Italians called him the big German bear. He moved to Italy in 1706, probably invited by one of the Medicis, probably Fernando Medici, who saw in him a real talent and wanted him to write for the Medici family. Now, opera was forbidden in Rome. It was forbidden by Pope Clement. And this comes down from St. Paul, who forbade women to speak in public places. Women had to remain silent in church. And, well, this is completely a segue and has nothing, not much, but that gave rise to the use of castrati, because if women couldn't sing in church, you were left with boys. And boys have a very, very short shelf life as a soprano. Just about the time you get them trained, they graduate. So a castrato, however, has a much longer shelf life. So this idea of women had to remain silent in public spaces, and especially in church, was what gave birth to the castrati. And then, of course, castratos became very popular in opera, and Handel used them. And I guess this connects with Messiah, because Guadagni, one of the great castrati, later sang in Messiah. But should I get back on track now? Yes, okay. So Handel, because he couldn't write opera, he was in Rome with powerful friends and powerful rich patrons, he turned to cantatas and oratorios. And this, good. This is the Teatro Argentina. And it is, actually, I love this theater because it's the theater where Rossini did several performances of his first operas, including Barbara of Seville. And just to carry on our previous theme, there are no women in the chorus of most Roman operas. Barbara of Seville has only men in the chorus. Women were willing to be exorcised and forbidden from the church if they sang a major role and got paid a lot of money, but they would not sing in the chorus. And so there were usually no choruses that included women in Rome. But I love this picture because this is a concert, and it's probably an oratorio. And do you see the stage? The stage has a set. You see the chorus. Is this what Reynolds is going to look like on Sunday? Yes. And you see the orchestra seated and the soloists in front, and then the nobility and everyone in the halls. And this is the way the early oratorios were probably performed. And he wrote several oratorios and cantatas. He wrote The Triumph of Time. This is my fault. The Triumph of Time, Il Trionfo del Tempo, in 1707, and Resurrezione in 1708. Now, in both of those oratorios, they have incredible characters. In Resurrezione, Lucifer makes an appearance. So there are always characters or they're often characters in oratorios, but they're usually from the Bible or based on sacred texts. All theatrical performances were forbidden in Lent. So the theaters were closed. Come in. The theaters were closed. So opera companies were out of business. So I feel, and I'm not alone, that oratorio was invented as a way of keeping opera singers and orchestras employed during Lent. Musicians, opera singers, opera directors, orchestra players were giggers. So, and as there's a wonderful letter from Venice in the 17th century. I saw Padre Germani 3 times yesterday. He was a castrato. He sang Mass in the morning. He took my confession in the afternoon, and in the evening, I saw him play the part of a village maiden at the theater. So, and then there's another letter saying, I can sing in the first act chorus at the Teatro Argentina in Venice, and then I can get in a gondola and run across town, and I can do the finale at another theater if I hurry. And I experienced this at New York City Opera when I was chorus master. I would, in big operas like Turandot or something, we'd hire a lot of extra choristers, and I would sometimes see them at the intermission running out of the theater. Don't worry, we'll be back, but if we make it to the Met to sing the crowd sing in Meistersinger, we'll get an extra fee, and we'll be back in time to sing the finale here. So I understand the idea of oratorio as a way to keeping everybody employed, but that's a very cynical view. Here, what's next? Now, good. This is a concert, probably again, another oratorio, and it's given by the French ambassador to Rome. And it's in a palace. This is a palace. It's the Palazzo Farnese. Do we have opera fans here? Tosca? Tosca is the Palazzo Farnese. Features prominently in Tosca. And again, you see the stage set up with stage sets. And I think we should ask for this on Sunday. Do you see the soloists are in the clouds? Mary, do you think we can get this together? No? No. Okay. Well, maybe next year. Okay, good. So Handel made all these rich friends and patrons, and one of them was Cardinal Vincenzo Grimani. Very rich, came from a very powerful family, and he was also a librettist. He wrote many, many librettos. But how could he get them performed in Rome when it was forbidden? Well, luckily, his very rich family owned a theater in Venice, the Teatro San Giovanni Grisostomo. And so he collaborated with Handel, and Handel wrote his first big hit in Rome, which was Rinaldo. And this is madly commercial, but there's the wonderful Marilyn Horne on her golden horse singing the role of Rinaldo. It was produced in 1709 in Venice, and it was a phenomenal hit. It played for 27 consecutive nights. Now think about that. That in the in the 18th century was tremendous. And so Handel was hot. He was the hottest marketable composer in Europe, and he was courted by everyone. He was called back to Germany, to Hanover, to assume the role of Kapellmeister for Prince George, the Elector of Hanover. Do we have some British historians in the audience? Yes? No? Yes? Well, check me if I get wrong. But Prince George was soon to become King of Great Britain because of the laws of succession in England, because a Catholic could not be on the throne of England. It had to be a Protestant. And Queen Anne, who was currently on the throne, was not long for the earth. And so they had all found Prince George, who was a fairly distant relative, but he was a Protestant. So that was the one thing that was important. And so Handel went back to Hanover to work for Prince George, but almost immediately left for London in 1710. He was invited to London. Well, he was invited everywhere, but he took this assignment in London. And some people think he went to London as a spy. He went as kind of a mission to gather information and friends and colleagues to support Prince George, the future monarch of England. And he wrote the opera. Now I'm a little out of order. Let's see. Oh dear. Well, he wrote, we'll come to it eventually. He wrote the opera Agrippina, which was his first, no, I've done that. He wrote the opera Rinaldo, which was produced in this theater, the Haymarket Theater. And it was also known as the Queen's Theater. And it was the first Italian opera composed in Italian, especially for England. They'd had Italian operas there before, but they'd all been imported. It was called the Queen's Theater, but it was only going to be the Queen's Theater for a few more years. Rinaldo became the most popular opera of Handel's stay in England. It was performed throughout his lifetime, and it was the first opera performed at the Met in 1984. Now, with King George on the throne in 1714, Handel became a permanent resident of England. And this is his home, 25 Brook Street, which ironically, in the 20th century, also became the home of Jimi Hendrix. So now it is a museum. It's known as the Handel Hendrix House. So I'm sure both of them are very happy and proud of that. And it's a marvelous museum. They have performances there and so many, many things. And he became a British citizen in 1727. Now, who was Handel? That's a very difficult question to answer because Handel was intensely private. And at the end of his life, Handel, Chris, you will appreciate this, cataloged all of his musical works incredibly carefully. And he made arrangements for the disposition of his scores and his incredible collection of paintings, everything. But he destroyed all of his personal correspondence. So everything we know about the personal life of Handel, we know from his friends. And here is Mary Pendarvis Delaney, who was his neighbor. She was a wealthy widow. She had married Mr. Pendarvis, and she moved to Brook Street in 1730 and became a close friend of Handel. Now, ladies, I have to apologize to you for my sex, because ladies in the 18th century, if you were unmarried, you could not own property, you could not buy property, you could not travel independently without a companion, usually a male companion, and it was very difficult for a single woman. But a widow was different. A widow could be independent. And luckily, Mr. Pendarvis was both rich, and he died when she was still very young. So she was able to have an incredibly independent life. And luckily for us, she was a copious letter writer and diarist. And I will give you a reading list at the end of the talk. There's a marvelous book by the Handel scholar Ellen Harris. It's called Handel, A Life with Friends. So she can't do a biography really of the intimate life of Handel, but she can give a biography of several of his friends. And Mary Delaney and Mr. Delaney, who she married later, will figure in the history of Messiah. She entertained Handel all the time. She was also a phenomenal artist. And this is a book about her. Later in her life, she became adept at what she called paper mosaics. This is a paper cutout. Everything on that page is paper. So she became the friend of a great botanist who showed her all of his precious plants and flowers. She became fascinated with them and began making sketches of them. And they are so accurate that botanists today study them because they want to see the changes in the flowers over now 200 years. I'll read one of her letters. I had Lady Rich and her daughter, Lady Catherine Hammer, and her husband, Mr. and Mrs. Percival, Sir John Stanley, and my brother, Mrs. Donnellan, Strada del Po, the great star soprano of Handel's current opera, and Mr. Coote. Lord Shaftesbury begged of Mr. Percival to bring him also, and being a professed friend of Handel, who was here also, I admitted him. I never was so well entertained as at being at an opera. Mr. Handel was in the best of humor in the world and played lessons and accompanied Miss Strada and all the other ladies who sang from 7 o'clock until 11. So you'd think our rehearsals are long. I gave them tea and coffee, and about half an hour after 9, I had a salver brought in of chocolate, mulled white wine, and biscuits. Everybody was easy and seemed well pleased. So that's just one of many of her letters and diaries, and that's what we know about, that's how we know more about Handel. Handel wrote 40, think of that, 40 Italian operas for England. And that, besides being an extraordinary number of operas, is, I think, extraordinary that Italian opera could survive in England that long. I don't really understand, but I'm so grateful. It is a bit, I think, like a fascination with an exotic animal, like the first time you see an elephant or the first time you see a hippogriff. Oh, I think that's a mythological character. But, or maybe it's like Lady Gaga. It's so unusual and extraordinary, it's something that you're fascinated with. But Rinaldo, which was his first opera in England, one of the wonderful things about that, and one of the wonderful things about Baroque opera in general, had extraordinary stage machinery. And you were able to change sets in the twinkling of an eye because of the incredible stage machines that were all done with ropes and pulleys and trap doors. So Alcina's Magic Palace could be changed to a desert just like that with the pull of a rope. And I don't know if you know this, but whistling is bad luck in the theater. In fact, if you're with a theater, an old, experienced theatrical performer, if you whistle in a theater, they will make you leave and knock on the door to come back in. And you know why? Because those ropes and pulleys were all run by retired sailors. And sailors take all their cues from whistles. So they were all there waiting to pull a trap door or to pull a set to come down. And if you casually started whistling, they would think it was their cue and pull the trap door, and you could descend to the bottom of the theater. So it was forbidden. But it made these incredible performances possible. So Handel, we'll show another one of Mary Delaney's incredible, aren't they beautiful? When I started doing this, I thought, wow, that's beautiful. Wow, that's beautiful. Wow. Well, let's just show a few more. So, he wrote 40 operas, but the English eventually got tired of this. That was like, why are you writing these Italian operas? And competition was launched by John Gay, who wrote The Beggar's Opera, which was a parody in English of Italian opera. And to add insult to injury, John Gay included many of Handel's tunes in The Beggar's Opera, yes, indeed. And it became so popular, it sold out every night. So Handel's operas began being deserted by the audiences, and worse yet, by the patrons. And Handel began using his own money. Handel was one of the few composers who died rich. Richard Strauss was another composer who died rich, Verdi. Lots of composers don't die rich. Mozart, poor Mozart, one of his patrons came to visit him one night and found him and Constanza dancing around their apartment. And he said, "Oh, you're so happy, you're dancing around." Mozart said, "We're not happy, we can't afford fuel, we're trying to keep warm." But Handel was nervous. He was facing bankruptcy. His last Italian opera was, okay, I have to get this right, Deidamia in 1741. And it's the story of Achilles there on the left, hiding in a neighboring country so he didn't have to go to the Trojan War, because he knew his father knew he was going to die in the Trojan War. And Ulysses, who's in the back, so he was hiding, disguised as a woman, in a neighboring kingdom. And clever Hercules brought as a present a box filled with treasures for the women, and in it he placed a helmet, a sword, and guess who chose the helmet and the sword out of the treasures intended for the women? And then, of course, he found it was Achilles and said, "Come on, you have to go to the war with me." But it was a flop. It only played for 3 nights to empty houses. And so Handel was in trouble. He was facing bankruptcy. But guess who saved him? Charles Jennens, the librettist of Messiah. Now, you'll say, but Messiah is all Bible verses, so why do you need a librettist? Jennens strung the Bible verses together, and very cleverly, because if you look carefully at where the Bible verses come from, they're not contiguous. In fact, in many, many numbers in Messiah, you will find part of the number from one chapter of the Bible and another part of the same number from another chapter. So Charles Jennens was this incredible mind that put together this oratorio. He was wealthy. His father was the biggest smelter in England. I love saying that. He was a non-juror. He did not believe in the legitimacy of the Georgian reign. He did not believe that King George should be King of England. He felt that the sovereign of Great Britain should have been descended from Mary, Queen of Scots, and it should have been a Jacobean, one of the descendants of James. He was also an anti-deist. So going back to a non-juror, he would obey the law, but he would not swear, he would not jure that King George was the rightful king. And he was so rich, King George let him be. And there was a big group of non-jurors. He was also an anti-deist. And deism was a movement in the 18th century against the miracles. Well, it was a movement of many things, but it was a scientific movement that said the miracles in the Bible are the result of science. The 18th century was the age of enlightenment. So the miracles that happened were just the result of nature and science taking care of things. Lazarus, he was just taking a nap. And, the dumb shall speak, well, it was just a scientific thing. Jennens said, no, a miracle is a miracle. The Bible says that miracle is a miracle. He was also an incredible art collector, and because he was so rich, he could buy the most incredible art and the most recent compositions from the continent. He was a big music patron and a great friend of Handel. He supported many of Handel's projects, and they became close friends. He also wrote several libretti preceding Messiah, including Saul and L'Allegro, Il Penseroso, and Il Moderato. He devised a new libretto, and it was entitled Messiah, which means the anointed one. Jennens wrote to a friend, I hope Mr. Handel, I should explain too, Jennens was a curmudgeon. He was never very happy about anything. I hope Mr. Handel will lay out his whole genius and skill upon it, and that the composition may excel all his former compositions, as this subject excels every other subject, because the subject is Messiah. Now, here's King George II. It was his father, King George I, who had brought Handel to England, and it's King George II for whom Handel wrote the great coronation anthems. Do we want to sing Zadok the priest? No? Okay. And King George was not really a patron of the arts. He didn't like painting. He spoke with a German accent because he'd been born in Hanover. I do not like painting or poetry. And I think music went in there, but he supported Handel. But Jennens had an issue with King George because Jennens felt he was not the legitimate king of England. So if you notice, I see many, many Messiah choristers. If you notice in the libretto, it's all about the kings of the earth are going to be swept away because there's one King of Kings. And he's up, or she is up there, and they're going to take care of you. So I think it's very interesting that King George II was at the performance of Messiah as these very treasonous words were being spoken. Now, do you stand up during the Hallelujah chorus, or do you remain seated? Do you stand up? Yes. Do you remain seated? Oh, I guess we all one anti-standing. Well, I read, when I was researching this, I've heard everything. I've heard that King George, who supposedly was the one who initiated standing up, stood up because he had gout. And by that point, his foot was just, oh, I got to do something. Oh, I'm going to stand up. But I just read this incredible explanation by Dr. Roy Atwood, and I have to acknowledge him. He stood up during the Hallelujah chorus, and it says, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And King George was anointed King of Great Britain, and that meant he was anointed by God. And in the coronation service, they acknowledge that the King of Great Britain is actually a descendant of Jesus, and therefore he stood up because he acknowledged that there was a greater king than he was. And actually, that makes beautiful sense to me, and I like it better than gout. So,